Hello and welcome to this still life. We've got a copper pot here with some cherry blossoms and some cherries. So I'm working on the sienna pastel matte paper here. It's small. It's only 18 centimeters by 24 centimeters. You can see I've got a rough sketch on the actual paper, and I'm starting with the background as always. Well, I shouldn't say always, but 99% of the time. I start with the background and I work from back to front. So basically, putting in the background with some Art Spectrum Extra Soft. These colors are from the skin tone set, which I think worked really beautifully. Now you can see the reference photograph has got this turquoise and kind of like rusty browny background, and I really liked the color combination with the purples and the ambers of the copper pot. So I chose to leave it in and do it in a very similar sort of style. I generated this image using an AI program. I just really fancied painting some rose gold and burgundy. And so I thought, what's rose gold and burgundy-ish? And I came up with this. I actually haven't pasteled any copper before, but generally speaking, I absolutely love painting ceramics, brass, glass. I just find it so therapeutic. And I find it doesn't take a lot of effort for an object like glass or a vase or a ceramic bone china to come together nicely. I find painting things that are organic, like foliage, far more difficult. But when it comes to man-made objects, I just find that they just come together really nicely. Anyway, so you can see for the copper, I've put in dark, very dark browns as well as oranges and yellows, and I've even put in purpley grays, and putting in my darks, my midtones and lights, and making sure that the darks are dark enough, because if they're not, when it comes to putting in the highlight, it's not going to pop. It's going to fall flat. So you saw me holding up the printout there. That's just to make sure that I've got my shape correct. I find when it comes to pasteling things like ellipses, it's actually quite tricky. It's a tricky shape, and I try and get it as accurate as possible, because if it's not, it's going to be an eyesore. Your eye is going to be drawn straight to any ellipses that are kind of off. So also I should say that this is slightly at an angle, so the copper pot is looking a little bit, the shape isn't looking really good, but that's because you're also at an angle. So the finished painting, I was happy with the shape. So here you can see me correcting the shape. It's one of the easiest things I do. If I'm struggling, all I do is make a stencil out of the photocopy and stencil around, and then correct the shape where it needs to be corrected. So I used a mixture of Art Spectrum Extra Soft, Giro, Unison, and Sennelier. Can't forget the Senneliers. They are just such beautiful pastels to work with. So here you can also see I'm adding like a cadmium yellow. So the copper pot, it's got lots of different colors in it. Now the blossoms, going in with my dark red violets first. So I'm using the Terry Ludwig Dark Intense 2 set. They've got some really beautiful dark red violets in there, which are brilliant for the base. So when it comes to painting single petaled flowers, I find that they can come together quite nicely. The same principle, working dark to light, so making sure you got your darks in there, your midtones and your lights, and your blossom can come together quite nicely. I find it much trickier to paint flowers that have several petals, something like roses, for example. But yeah, single leaf, unless it's a single petaled rose, then, you know, same principle as daisies or as these cherry blossoms. So I'm using a mixture, lots of purples. I'm using a lot of Giro as well. They've got a lovely range of also red violets. Really lovely. So I could have done the whole background in one swoop and came and painted the cherry blossoms on top of the background. But I find sometimes it muddies the pastel just a little bit, and I wanted to keep my color as pure as possible for these blossoms. Keep the lilacs yeah, more fresh, because sometimes I find it does muddy slightly, and so that's why I'm actually working the background around the blossoms. I'm kind of building up the background in certain parts and the blossoms together. And I find it worked. It worked just fine. When it comes to flowers, that's usually my approach, as I said, because I wanted to keep the colors fresh. So I had to invent the twig going from the copper pot out, because if you look on the reference photograph, there is no twig. But I had to try and make this make sense, because otherwise it's going to look like this branch is just floating behind, which is odd. I needed to ground it. It needed to come from somewhere. So I just added that branch in there, and I put highlights. The highlights are a blue violet by Terry Ludwig. So when you're working with a really dark object like this dark branch, putting in white as a highlight would just be an eyesore. Going a lighter value, and also a little bit something with a bit more color like the blue violet, works really nicely. It also works nicely because it ties in with the color scheme of the painting, which is red, violet and your ambers. So I started with the cherries base layer with the Terry Ludwig Dark Intense set. The reds in there are phenomenal. They're so beautiful because they are vibrant. They're so dark, but they're vibrant. They're not like dead dark colors. So using a mixture mainly of the Terry Ludwigs and a few Art Spectrum extra soft portrait set for the orangey that you can see, those orangey colors you can see in the flesh of the cherry. I also used a beautiful dark red from Sennelier for the lightest red value you can see in the cherry. Also, the highlights are done with a light violet color, not white. Just it adds more interest, and it also is more realistic. You know, if you look at a cherry and it's in a spotlight, the brightest part of the cherry is not going to be blinding white. Excuse me. It's going to take on more of a blue violet or even a pinky tone. So I use pink in here for the highlights as well as lilacs and blue violets. So the cherry sitting more in the background there, I've used this dark purple, again from the Terry Ludwig Dark Intense 2 set. So I've kept more of the readiness, the ready cherries in the foreground, and added more of a dark violet for the cherries in the background. That is a beautiful Carmine by Sennelier. It's like such a deep, shocking pink. And also some beautiful violets, like periwinkle violets from Giraud, are going into these blossoms, as well as a bunch of pinky, lilac-y colors. That bright pink you can see there, that is a Jack Richardson from the portrait set. Also lovely. So these flowers I'm busy with now on this side, I've added more pink to them. So I've kept the flowers on the left hand side, they're a little bit more in shadow, so they got a little bit more of gray violets and red violets, where, as I said, the ones on the right, they're going to have more pink in them. So here you can see I'm going in with a light pink from Giraud, still adding a little bit of that dark red violet to get the depth, and then that's the background browny gray color. So I'm working, as I said, I'm working the blossoms and the background kind of together. So the middle of, with the stamens and everything, the middle of the blossoms, going in with dark reddy browns and then lightening a little bit with orange, then putting those little stamens in with a hard pastel, a yellow hard pastel. And I use Creta color as well as Comte for my hard pastels. So in these blossoms, there's actually a lot of colors going in here, but I'm sticking to the violets, the red violets, the blue violets, and the pinks. So for the scent, you can see I'm starting in with like a dark burnt orange, going in with the brighter yellow, then a white. The Comté white heart stick isn't a glaring bright white. It's quite a dull white. So it is also has its uses, most definitely. And it worked really well to put in the lightest part of the stamens of these blossoms. You'll also see me use pastel pencils. I use the pastel pencils to lay down color, but they obviously don't lay down as much color as a pastel stick does. But you can see it's really useful when you want to get your shapes correct. And or if you've got pastel pigment on the paper already, it's quite useful to use a pastel pencil to kind of manipulate the pastel into shape. So I use a mixture of pastel pencils as well as the big chunky pastel sticks. If you're enjoying this, please do subscribe to me here on YouTube and give it a like, because apparently it helps my content be shown to more people, so it'd be really helpful. Thank you. And if you've enjoyed this, then you can also check me out on Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description below, where I've got over 100 tutorials ranging from still life subject as well as genre paintings, as well as these mini fruit and vegetables and animals, and I have a few landscapes on there. Anyway, so yeah, as I said, I'll leave a link in the description below. So just finishing off these blossoms now, as well as doing the background, which, as I've mentioned several times, works really well for me. Now I've covered every inch of the paper. So this is the part of the painting process where I make any changes or add little details. Like you can see me now, I'm adding the stems, the little stems of the blossoms that attach to the big actual branch. Used a mixture of Giraud because you can get nice thin pastel marks with them because they're really small. I love using my Girauds actually. They're a brilliant pastel if you don't already own some. But also adding the little stems. I wasn't happy with the stems of these cherries, so you'll see me. I go in a few times and just correct. It's so easy to make corrections with pastel and pastel matte as long as you work in thin layers. So these are the finishing details, putting in your highlights, adding this a little bit of a cherry blossom that has fallen onto the table, adding my little shadow. I think sometimes it just completes a work when you add a little bit of something extra onto the table, like a little leaf or a blossom petal. So I'm going to leave you here for the next minute or so. I hope you have enjoyed this, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye for now.